international customer sets that have to be reached out to. Bottom line on all this is that while a company like Eaton has strong local roots, we have to pay attention, we have sensitivities more so than ever to an international customer and international stakeholders. And it's not just those bad multinationals either. If we think of these strong local institutions, Cleveland Clinic, Cleveland Cavaliers, the Cleveland Orchestra, the same international dimensions and considerations are at work there. Like it or not, we compete in a global village, and any practice, be it seniority instead of productivity as the determiner of ongoing employment, et cetera, it's a cruel world. And if you don't maintain world-class competitive practices, the factors of production can migrate readily. Charles, back to you.
All right, thank you. Our last speaker is Bob Aliber. Bob is Professor Emeritus at the Graduate School of Business at the University of Chicago. He's written and spoken extensively on international economics, and we're delighted to have him here today. Now, I've gotten in trouble before for introducing people as old friends, but perhaps I can get away by saying Bob's a friend of 40 years standing. Bob?
Thank you, Charles. I'm reminded of the time that Ernest Hemingway, a young writer, interviewed Albert Einstein. Hemingway was writing for a magazine. At the end of the day, Einstein said, "Hemingway, may I ask you a question?" And Hemingway responded, "Ask me anything you want." And Einstein said, "You have two notebooks. You write down a lot of what we chat about in one notebook, but you keep the other notebook under your arm. You haven't opened it. What's that for?" And Hemingway said, "Dr. Einstein's very simple. That's the notebook I write down all my good ideas." And he said, "Surely you've got a notebook like it." And Einstein said, "Oh no, it's very sad. I don't have many good ideas." I want to get two ideas across today, three actually, in the 5 minutes allotted to me. The first is that the economy is doing brilliantly given the trauma that we've come through. We've had the worst financial crisis in 75 years. And a year ago, we were still on the edge. And thanks to policy in Washington, we now have a high growth rate and the potential for considerable expansion. Having said that, let me say that this is the fourth global financial crisis in the last 40 years. Each of these crises has involved 3, 4 or more countries. Each of these crises has been preceded by an asset price bubble, by a rate of growth of indebtedness of particular groups of borrowers of 20, 25, 30% a year. These credit flows were Ponzian. The borrowers were getting the money to pay the lenders from the lenders in the form of new loans. Those credit flows were not sustainable. And our financial institutions, both in the private sector and in the public sector, have failed to understand what was happening. And it is not clear they now understand what has been happening. Having said that, we are now recovering. Now, there are two more issues that I'd like to speak to. We have the potential for a lot of growth. But one country that is going to have great problems is China, that has done brilliantly. China is going to implode. It has been growing very, very rapidly. When China implodes, they're going to have a very sharp increase in their trade surplus. A very large part of our trade deficit is the mirror of China's trade surplus. The Chinese will not do anything seriously about reducing their trade surplus. We, unfortunately, ask them to change the value of their currency, and we confuse an instrument and a target. Our target should be to get a reduction in the Chinese trade surplus with us, and we should allow the Chinese to choose the instrument of that policy. With Europe, we have a fascinating crisis in that the markets have misunderstood the difference between a credit crisis involving Greece, perhaps Portugal and Ireland, and a currency crisis. That has led to a very sharp depreciation of the euro. But when Greece develops an independent currency, as it almost certainly will, we will see that the euro will appreciate quite sharply and that our exports to Europe will again begin to grow. So I would say the outlook is very good. We have tremendous excess capacity in the economy. The profit share of GDP is high. We have considerable growth in international competition, and we do not want the authorities that have essentially allowed the shocks to develop from Washington to impose another shock on us in the next several years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. A couple of questions, then we'll turn it over to the audience. What do you think, what do you see for Ohio in particular? I mean, is manufacturing coming back? Is that going to build this region back?
Charles, yeah, when you look at the things that have hurt the Ohio economy over the past couple of years, first we have several large banks that were domiciled here that have had significant problems over this period. The manufacturing sector, we have above average dependence on manufacturing, whose clock was cleaned by this recession, manufacturing in general, and then on top of that, the particular problems of the auto industry. So if you look at the things that have in particular hurt the Ohio economy over the past couple of years, these can turn around and help the Ohio economy in a recovery period. Right now, again, there's some irony in this, manufacturing is leading the way for the economy. I say it's an irony because a lot of people in the United States don't believe we have a manufacturing sector anymore. I can attest to the fact that we have a very strong and vital and important manufacturing sector. So it's rebounding very strongly. We've lost a lot of capacity in the auto industry, but the auto industry has hit bottom and now is ramping up, and I expect that ramp up to spill over for a couple of years till we get back to a normal rate of production. The banking system has stabilized. Exports are growing very strongly. Ohio is the 7th largest exporting state in the country. And also the farm sector. A lot of people forget that we have a farm sector here in Ohio and in this country. It's an important area of the Ohio economy. Farm prices, at least the grain prices, are pretty strong. And so if we have some good weather, the farmers will have a good year. So I put all these things together, and I think Ohio can have a pretty good rebound this year.
Charles, just briefly, I think if we recognize that it's 2010 and not 1945, we can understand the path for success for Ohio and the East North Central region. Our labor costs are high, and therefore the things that we can successfully manufacture are highly engineered, highly technical products. We're never going back to the 40s and 50s as a steel maker, as a basic goods maker. Either our technology demands or our labor costs or our environmental demands are going to push those businesses ashore. What we need to do here are create those products and accept the fact that, implicit in that is the payrolls, the workforce is going to decline, much as it has over the last 100 years in the agricultural sector. The manufacturing sector will never create as many jobs, but it can be vibrant and it can be a key part of the economy and a key part of this region, as long as we recognize what our strengths are, which is engineering capacity and smarts and know-how.
But see that,
Let me
I'm sorry.
speak to that issue, not what is going to happen to Ohio, but what's going to happen to American manufacturing, and approach the question internationally. And so the question we should focus on is, what is the largest trade deficit that the United States can afford in the long run? That's going to be a trade deficit that is no more than 1% to 2% of our GDP, because we have interest to pay to our foreign creditors. So as our trade deficit declines from, let's say, 4% of GDP to 1% of GDP, that's a decline of 3% of GDP, and all of that change in GDP, virtually all that change has to take place in manufacturing or in tradable goods. 3% of GDP is ballpark $400 billion to $500 billion. That's a tremendous increase in manufacturing output, and it is inevitably going to happen someplace within the United States.
At what exchange rate, though?
But
That's the problem that Washington has to worry about. We have to stop allowing foreign countries to participate in beggar thy neighbor policies, because there's some 19th century rhetoric about free trade.